Right, with all due respect, it's 34 days to the August 9th election. The IBC calendar is at its tail's end. 4 presidential candidates have been cleared, while a host of others were blocked by IBC. Although today, Third Way Alliance candidate Ekuru Okot successfully petitioned the court. The court's decision today could lead to the reopening of the candidates list, which could affect preparations for the August poll. But there's been a litany of lawfare leading up to the August elections. The degree questions has occupied our minds for a while: voter register, manual or electronic, and why does any or both make a difference? Use and misuse of public resources. Who's to be questioned? I do have the top legal minds with me in studio tonight. Professor Migaya Ketch, public and international trade scholar and practitioner. Karibu sana to the program.
Thank you, James.
And of course, Dr. Korisinoe, Deputy President's legal advisor. Karibu sana to the program as well.
Thank you, James.
I'll try and keep up and swim in this, great legal minds. But, gentlemen, let's start with this question that has occupied our minds and still continues to occupy minds, and I think it's the easiest one to deal with, which has happened today. The courts, declaring one part of, IBC's, litany of things that they had actually asked for as unconstitutional. Prof, what do you think this tells us, and what is your crystal ball telling you?
I don't think it might mean much in practical terms, because usually when a court declares a provision of a law unconstitutional, it does not affect the validity of what has been done prior to that declaration of invalidity. So I think it would depend on it would be interesting to read the decision of the court and see whether the court actually says that the decision of the IBC stating that certain candidates can vie for the election and others cannot can be revisited. I doubt it will do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what is most likely going to happen is that the decision will operate prospectively.
Moving forward.
Yes, which makes administrative sense. You can imagine
the chaos that
it might mean if we were to say, let us redo this process all over again.
Yeah.
So I don't think it might mean much in
mostly it's an academic exercise mostly.
I agree with the premises of the decision, but I think you look forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Kuri, where do you sit on this?
I think I agree with Professor Migai. I think essentially what the court has said is that the requirement which IBC regulation had imposed on presidential candidates in relation to the 2,000 registered voters in 24 counties at a minimum supporting their presidential bid, and the requiring that those 2,000 names needed to be evidenced or supported by
documents.
By an ID was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So IBC essentially had imposed a much higher, much more stringent, strenuous standard, if you like. And so what they've done today is to say that IBC probably went beyond what the Constitution required it to do. And so it has opened the door for other players, possibly, at least in relation to Ekuru, that was the big barrier. In relation to Wanjigi, I think there are a couple of other things, including academic qualification. In relation to I think one other candidate, the musician. What's his name?
Nyambani.
No, not Nyambani, the musician. So in relation to Kigame, Ruben Kigame,
yes.
I think the issue also was whether he was able to meet the 2,000 voters in 24 counties, and so I think there's a possibility of a few more of them, crossing the Rubicon and becoming presidential candidates.
But so the logistical nightmare there is that IBC already had started printing the ballot papers yesterday, literally. Because the candidate list was closed by last week. So that creates a constitutional problem, because the election has to be held on the 9th, unless there is another way for us to push the election forward.
Which there isn't.
It's not really a constitutional nightmare. It just puts a lot more pressure on IBC in terms of whether it would be able to meet those timelines. There might be cost implications because if, in fact, they had factored, that they would only be having these 4 candidates and then that number has increased, what does that do to their preparations, et cetera, et cetera. But overall, I think it's the kind of issues that IBC should have anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's talk briefly about the academic questions. This is, possibly the most exciting ones. And as we set this up before, go for the break, the question of academics surprisingly has become such a huge thing that all of a sudden, the degrees need to be validated and, the place of CUE to validate those things, apparently is, maybe just clerical to say, yeah, we recognize this university and that sort of thing. Exactly what is the problem with the academical qualifications and credentials?
I don't think the debate really is about academic credentials as much as it is about integrity. And you'd want to look at it from 2 perspectives. If you're looking at it from the perspective of a democracy, we are a democracy, not an aristocracy. It's not rule of the best. So you'd want every individual, whatever their education background, to be able to participate in elections and also to elect whomever they want. So from that perspective, I don't think education is such a big deal. But also look at it from the viewpoint of the challenges we have in terms of ensuring that everybody has access to education. Because if you insist on these academic qualifications, what you're saying is that people that are disadvantaged will never have the opportunity to either, but in particular, to vie for certain positions. So, and I don't think that is fair. And from what I've gathered from the debate in the Senate, for example, on the basis of the education backgrounds, there has to be more. But that said, having already then said in certain situations that in the law that you will require education requirements for certain positions, then you'd want to see somebody who's offering themselves for elective posts to have some integrity, to show some integrity and say that, look, I respect this process. I may not agree with it. It may not make sense in a polity such as ours, given the low levels of education and the challenges of accessing it. However, we have this requirement. Let me
meet the requirement.
Meet the requirement. Because the fear is, if somebody plays with something as little as their academic credentials, and these are people that you want to entrust with billions of shillings.
Yeah.
What is it that will stop them from cheating you, with respect to these very large economies that they'll be running?
So essentially, if they lie on such a small thing as a piece of paper,
yes,
they can lie with so much more.
What can they not lie about?
I think Dr. Gori wants to have a contrary view. So I'm going to take a short break because I want that view to have full time in this, with all due respect. We'll be right back.
The Communications Authority of Kenya, CA, regulates the broadcasting industry, promoting development of local content and ensuring responsible use of broadcasting platforms for national good. The Communications Authority of Kenya, opening your world.
First, you'll want to go to the gym, do exercise, and if you're going to play in a specific course, go 2 days before you go to that course. Practice it's a competition. So when you play the actual competition, you won't tense, you won't get tired. It'll just be easy and fun for you.
Are you okay? Hey.
Naomba come kuni bail out.
Ai. Hata unajua singeza ku bail out. Ujinga ulifanya ndugu yangu.
Unaongea mbaya. Na usiongea mbaya.
Naongea mbaya. Nisikuone tena Pope.
I'm happy to present to you Malindi City Breeze Phase 2. The entire property is fenced, has mature mango trees. It's a property you can build up your getaway home. You can do a home here for Airbnb. Call us now on 0790 300 300.
I take this opportunity to join the board and management of the Public Sector Accounting Standards Board to the occasion of the launch of its second strategic plan on the 7th of July at the Pan-Afric Hotel as from 7:30 a.m. all through to 10:30 a.m.
All right, with all respect, welcome back. We are discussing sort of the legal problems and the legal questions as we head into the elections. And just before we took the break, we were on the questions of the degree of lies in this country, where Prof had left us. Doc, yeah. the question, and I think is, I mean, just to lead, to your response, the question of integrity, that we have an entire chapter in our constitution on integrity, which every time appears to be an inside joke between the drafters and Kenyans, that no one else really got this, especially in either, politicians or people who work in public service. They just don't care about this type of integrity. This question of degree, where do you think it is? Is it a question of just, integrity, or there's something underlying in there?
I think integrity is at the core of it. But for me, it even goes beyond individuals, beyond these persons who want to run for office. I think it also goes to the institutions themselves. Number one, it speaks to the question of the quality of higher education, the dilution of it, the weakening of our standards, basically within a lot of higher education institutions, which opens it up for pretty much all sorts of people to get in and to get out. But it speaks to the integrity of the institutions. Can they vouch actually that when there is a degree with their seal on it, that actually means something? Do they care? Do they really care
about this?
We have sort of really instrumentalized education so that it's more to do with the perception more than the substance. And we forget that we have an economy to run. We have science and technology to develop. We've got a lot of things to move our country forward, and that requires very high quality education, which sits upon the infrastructure of good systems and good institutions, and we have failed to do that very, very well. Yeah, but coming to the question of integrity in Chapter 6, when you look at the drafting of the enabling legislation, it is true. They saw little in there to really give you the impression that the legislators thought that the provisions of Chapter 6 was so critical in terms of shifting or changing our political culture towards a real progressive democracy, the way Professor Migai has talked about. A lot of them, again, just really wanted to be minimalist. In fact, the approach of the leadership, the Ethics and Integrity Act, or the Leadership and Integrity Act, is a very minimalist approach. And in fact, if it wasn't that the courts have broadened the contours of that statute, if you just adopt a very positivist view of it, then you would be able, you would not do anything with this integrity question, so to speak. And so I think we remain pretty much stuck. And it's really up to the people in a way to make these choices at the end of the day, and they have that opportunity on the 9th of August.
And this is always the question that comes back,
Yeah.
the people or the politicians, or who should take the first stab at this, Prof?
But I think they're one of the same. For me, it is about societal values. And I don't think that Chapter 6 of the Constitution reflects Kenyan values as I see them. Because I see people that are too quick to cut corners at every single turn. And I'm a teacher, I see these all the time. Even in electoral processes, why are we always complaining about voter bribery? Why is it that voters are so cheap? You know somebody has ill-gotten wealth seeking public office. You know very well. They'll come, they'll give you 100 shillings. You'll still vote for them. So until we change our values as a society, I don't think we'll get a better crop of leaders, because they're drawn from the same
Catchment.
crop, the same catchment, so to speak. I mean, today's voter is tomorrow's MCA, MP, governor, name it. So for me, therefore, Chapter 6 of the Constitution remains aspirational.
Yeah, and I think in a way, again, just to concur with Professor, I was reading Michaela Rong's, writing, Do Not Disturb, which is a book really focused on Rwanda. And one of the things she grapples with at the very beginning of that book is what is the core of the Rwandan society in terms of values. And she concludes, actually, that the Rwandan society is very complex, but at the core of it is this culture of sophisticated lying, very high-level lying. In fact, it's celebrated. If you're able to lie to somebody and they don't even get it, then you're celebrating. And that made me reflect about the Kenyan society. I think when you look at it, we've got to admit it. I think we are a very corrupt society. So when we create laws that do not really focus on that, on the reality of where we are at the present, we create a gap between the law, and society. And yet we need to really begin to think about what kind of incentives we need to build to transform our society to become loving of these kind of values, the Constitution.
But the question is, who is supposed to do that? Really, the who?
Walimu.
It's about education, fundamentally. And educating particularly younger people so that they value things differently. I think we've become a very materialistic society, and it doesn't matter how somebody attains wealth in particular. So until we begin to have a different set of values and appreciate certain processes, and the patience to have a career or just be a productive member of society, we'll always have the same problems. We call it, what do you call it now? The wash culture.
Yeah.
It's very, like instant coffee, they want it now.
Chemically legit.
Like legit.
Yeah, so it is good to have aspirations in Chapter 6 of the Constitution, but I think it's going to take time. In my view, it's going to take a generational change for that to happen.
It's not very good news I'm hearing tonight. None of you give me anything to smile about. Let's talk about this question of register. This is the meat of things. At least there is a conflict there. On one side is insisting on manual register. The other one says, we want the electronic register. Educate me. What's the difference? Let's start with you, Dr.
Ari. I think we need to accept the fact that 207, what happened in 207 in this country, has continued to be very instructive regarding how we run our elections. And so when 2007 happened, and we ran into a crisis, one of the people we called to the country to help us understand what had happened was a judge, a South African judge called Judge Krigler. And in making the finding that it was not even possible to determine who had won the election, he proceeded then to make recommendations. And one of the recommendations was that Kenya should really move towards adopting a more electronic type of voting to enhance fairness, transparency, and verifiability of the elections. Subsequent to that, obviously, we have had a new constitution that builds a lot of that language, into our constitutional order. And when you look at our Elections Act, you can clearly see that the choice has been made, the normative choice has been made, that Kenya should adopt an electronic sort of led electoral process. And so, starting all the way from, I believe, the provisions of Section 6 of the Elections Act, the Act requires IEBC to undertake biometric registration of voters. You come ahead and you find yourself confronted with another requirement that IEBC should carry out verification about of those voters about 6 months to elections. You come to the most important section, I think, in relation to technology, which is, I believe, Section 44, which requires IEBC to put in place an integrated election management system, an integrated or rather electronic election management system. And Section 44 then requires IEBC to have in place a complementary system or a complementary mechanism in the language of the statute. The net effect of all that is that, to my reading, the law as it is requires that we have one register. And that register is an electronic register that is nested in this technological system called the Kenya Integrated Electoral Management System, otherwise known as the KIMS kits, etc., etc. And that process starts with a voter identification device, which is all electronic, which requires that one should be able to identify themselves using their biometric features, and that in the absence of that, the complementary of that is to use other forms of significant identification, but all of which are linked to the identification framework, the electronic identification framework, and that requires that then your identity card as a voter is entered into the KIMS kit, and that brings up your details. For example, you're a person with disability, or if peradventure, your thumbs or whatever, are disfigured, etc., etc. And so I think the view that has been taken is, in view of our history, where we've come from, and the imperative for a transparent, fair, and verifiable election, in view of the requirement of the statute, from biometric voter identification, verification, the requirement of the system, all of that together, in my view, require that we have an electronic system, a very robust electronic system, that is almost, that is capable of standing master in whatever situation, and that if peradventure one needs to use any other methods, that you should be able to enter, to feed back into the same electronic system, and be able to vote, so to speak. So that's the view that we hold.
Okay. Pro.
Korir is right. But, you know, technology fails. Nothing technological is foolproof, so to speak. Huh? And I think it just makes sense to say that if technology fails us in some situations, then we must have a backup system. Hence the need for complementarity, the complementary mechanism that is talking about. So I don't see what the controversy is. It seems fairly simple to me that yes, we have this electronic system, but in the scenarios, presumably or hopefully few scenarios where it doesn't fail, then we have a fallback. And part of our challenge is trust, because we are a very low trust society, but particularly when it comes to elections. If you look at the regulation of elections in this country, probably it's the most heavily regulated area of law in not just in Kenya, but I think elsewhere as well, precisely because of the very low levels of trust. And it goes back to the question of integrity, because they're very simple. If you look at the law, the regulations, they're very simple, they're very detailed. IEBC is always training its workers, telling them that this is what you do. It is step by step. Even a child of 5, if you told them that this is what you're going to be able to do, they will do it without fail.
But it doesn't happen here.
But it doesn't happen because of the low levels of trust. I'll give you an example. If you look at the regulations that are now dealing with situations where you're not able to use the electronic mechanism, it says that, well, you identify the voter, you issue the voter with ballot papers. Very simple, isn't it? And if the device fails, if the electronic device fails to identify a voter, then the presiding officer is supposed to identify the voter using the printed register. Okay?
So the manual register.
Yes. So how do we ensure that there's accountability and transparency in the process? Then it says that this should be done in the presence of party agents. And there's a form to fill. There's a form 32A to fill. The voter is supposed to fill form 32A before they're issued with the ballot papers. So you ask, how complicated is it? Because later on, if you have these forms, if issues arise in terms of electoral disputes, you can say, but these are the forms 32A. These are the people that we were not able to identify using the electronic register. We can verify.
So you know, this is actually the challenge.
Yes, I should build on the challenge, because we have 22 million voters in this time, number one. The last time I think was 15 million or thereabouts.
That's right.
It happens all through. The issue is this failing of the system is one that we are not aware, and it happens so often and so random. Okay, that is the problem number one, because in every election, and I've covered about 3, it happens so very often and very randomly. Then somehow, by the end of this voting exercise, you have people who voted, and none of this process ever took place. Now, if you're going to challenge that, the paperwork that you're going to drag you in for you to verify all this madness, it's going to go way beyond even the Supreme Court's time. But anyway, you wanted to make a point.
So the point is, and I think this is a very sad thing in a way, because the country invests billions of shillings on this technological framework, this technological system. It is the bulk of the cost of this election.
True.
To even continue contemplating failure, honestly, it's criminal negligence.
But it happens all the time.
All right. So I mean, the more we continue having this conversation about the possible failure, we give a free pass to IEBC, okay, to get away with it. I mean, we all run on electronic devices. You know, many of our institutions, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, the level of technology right now where we're at as a globe and as Kenya, I mean, should really allow us some latitude to be able to trust, you know, that we can be able to deliver this, especially given the level of investment. I mean, IBC has carried out all these test runs. You know, they have assured us that out of 45,000 KIMS kits, they've done tests, 41,000 of them are okay. They've added another 14,000 new purchases. You know, they've bought, they have gazetted all these polling centers. They're telling us that in addition to the KIMS kit, in every polling center, they'll have 6 additional ones that will be, you know, sort of mobile within a ward, just in case there's a problem. I mean, all of these preparations surely should mean something. Because the point I make, and I hope my, my senior colleague would agree, is, you know, the more we create what is not really a complementary system to me, but an alternative system, the more we create an incentive for the failure of one system so that we can default to the other. A less accountable, a less verifiable mode of voting. And to my mind, the possibilities of abuse on the part of, a manual system, a manual register, are just much more manifold.
So, but there's, I mean, with all the technology, and sometimes it fails, right? So
True.
what happens in that instance when it fails? We must provide also a very sort of logical, sort of backup. Supposing, we've all there, and for whatever reason, the KIMS kit does not go on.
That's why they're saying they have additional devices, etc., etc.
And that one also doesn't work.
Listen, I mean, we have used these KIMS kits to register people, okay? They didn't fail then. We've used them to verify. Why should it be that on election day we must cater for? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It's interesting. If you recall, Corinne,
if
you recall 2013,
yeah.
IBC tested I don't know what they're calling. They were calling them EVIDs at the time.
The electronic voter identification.
Yes, they
device.
tested them in a by-election.
It worked perfectly.
They were perfect.
Yeah.
But come election, they just couldn't. I mean, many of them were just not working. And so I think sometimes it's not so much about the technology as the people that are using the technology. And much of the time I find that there are no consequences for violating the law, because these are very simple, clear provisions of the law, but somehow we always let them get away with it. I was hoping, for example, that assuming, of course, that the Supreme Court in 2017, following the nullification of the election in September, would have said that, look, we hold the following individuals responsible for the following acts of violating the Constitution, violating the law, then there'd be consequences. Then you'd see less of this. Because sometimes I tend to think or to feel that some of these failures are deliberate. I don't think that
exactly.
It's not that the systems cannot work, it is that the systems are made not to work, but without consequences.
Okay.
But the Act prescribes several, criminal sanctions.
Has anyone ever been taken to court and prosecuted for violating any of the electoral laws?
It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. From 2007, there's presiding officers who decided to take off and never show up for a whole day, and just showing up, 2 days later. And it's happening consistently. This is a problem that we need to fix. When we come back, we're going to take the question of the Supreme Court. Thank you very much for the Supreme Court. And what will happen? Do you think we'll have an election petition this time, or it's a clear win? 70-30, 80-20, 90-10, or 60?
The petition has already been drafted.
With all due respect.
strategy is to attack with moderation.
The Kedong stage is a killer stage, so take it easy but push as well.
I am the current record holder of Laldia. Of course the big boys will beat my time, but I want to keep it tidy, not overdo things, looking at the bigger picture of an overall good, solid finish for Safaricom.
Remember, if you can't make it to Naivasha, you can catch the action live on www.ntv.co.ke/live. Dial *544 *21#. That should give you 1 GB valid for 1 hour. That's just long enough to watch any rally stage that's going to go down tomorrow.
We shall legalize weed.
Professor George Luchiri Wajakoya of the Roots Party. Raila Amolo Odinga of the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Party.
Unajua mimi sina pesa ya serikali ama ya kashfa.
David Mwaure Wahiga of the Agano Party. And
hakuna kura ya hasla mtaiba.
William Samoei Ruto of the Kenya Kwanza Alliance. Presidential Debate 2022. Do not adjust your sets.
Nat, are you okay?
Hey. Normally come kuni bail out.
Ai, hata unajua singeza ku bail out. Ujinga ulifanya ndugu yangu.
Unaongea mbaya. Na siongea mbaya.
Naongea mbaya. Nisikuone tena pupu.
I'm happy to present to you Malindi City Breeze Phase 2. The entire property is fenced, has mature mango trees. It's a property you can build up your getaway home. You can do a home here for Airbnb. Call us now on 0790 300 300.
All right, with all due respect, welcome back. I do have two top legal minds who have, been going about in the last half an hour on the questions on the legal lawfare and the things that we need to go through. Let's go to the question of the Supreme Court. Just before we left, the last elections we've had, I think it's only one election since 1992 that has not, had the opportunity to be moderated by the courts. Everything else, and 2007, right? And because of that, then we went into the problems that we did. Every election then has had some sort of participation of the courts, and this is where we brought the Supreme Court. Do the gentlemen tonight believe this election will end up in the Supreme Court as well, or this is a clear one and a clean one?
I think the petitions have already been drafted for the candidates and against the candidates.
So both sides have...
Both sides, I am sure, have already drafted their petitions. It will certainly, I think, it will go to the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. What are the things that you think are top that right now, I mean, if they've been drafted, it means the issues have already,
but you can
played out?
You see, in terms of the parameters that you look at, you're looking at particularly the provisions of Section 83 of the Elections Act. And, when candidates go to the Supreme Court, particularly the presidential election petition, what they're seeking to persuade the court is that, number one, that there was a substantial violation of the principles of the Constitution and the Elections Act, or that there were illegalities and irregularities that affected the result. So substantial violations, I think you're just looking at these provisions that we're talking about, the provisions of the Elections Act, the voter registration process, the voting process, the tallying process, all of that. Is the election conducted in a fair and free manner that reflects the will of the people? If you're talking about illegalities, you're talking about things like, which is what you're seeing now. You're already seeing claims that, oh, so-and-so is using public resources. And I think both camps are accusing
the IBC
of using public resources. or you're using public officers to campaign, or media coverage is favoring one candidate or the other, or media coverage is slanted one way or the other. If you're talking about, and that is going to be very difficult to prove in terms of the test that the courts have set is one, if you're talking about substantial violations, then that suffices. You don't have to prove anything more. You just have to persuade the court, which also is very problematic. We'll get
Is it that what happened in 2017?
It's what happened in 2017.
Yeah.
And I'm not too sure that the court reached the right decision in 2017, in my view. Obviously, I would imagine that I'm in the minority in that, but I'm not convinced. If you're talking about irregularities and illegalities, you have to prove that, you have to show that they affected the result. So how are you going to prove, for example, that it is because of media coverage by so and so in favor of one candidate as compared to another, that the outcome was affected? How do you demonstrate that?
How about public resources? The use of public
Same
resources?
thing, but you have to demonstrate that it affected the result.
Okay.
So how do you do that? Irregularities are a little easier, because you're talking about, and in 2017 there was quite a bit of it. Forms 34A had all manner of issues. Serial numbers missing, signed by the wrong people, not
two
signed.
Documents. So
Yes, all of those issues.
Right.
But you have to demonstrate that they affected the result.
Okay.
So, I mean, tests, but not very easy to apply. Because what you also don't want to do, and I think the 2017 Supreme Court judgment can be accused of that, has been accused of that in some quarters, is that you don't want a court determining an election. Particularly a very closely contested election. Yes.
No, I think aside from agreeing, largely with Prof, I think 2017 was a watershed moment in terms of election adjudication is concerned, because it represented the first time, especially on the continent, when a court was able to overturn presidential elections. Before then, nobody ever imagined it was possible. And following that, we immediately saw courts in Liberia, courts in Malawi, and in other jurisdictions actually, taking that bold move. So environmentally speaking, there has been a huge mindset shift, so that adversaries in an electoral process, including in our own context, would find that strategizing around contesting an election is part of the matrix. So I would not be surprised if indeed, the assertion that Professor Migai has made, that there are petitions already being drafted for and against, is actually the reality. Because there is, 2017 represented the possibility that in fact you could lose, or you could be declared the loser in an election, but you could win big in courts. But that's also a good thing, in the sense that it represents the triumph of the rule of law. And it represented the possibility that an election arbiter can be held to account regarding the manner in which they have conducted the entire process. And that's why IEBC then sits in a very important space. Whatever it is doing right now, they need to know that either parties would be able to latch on it, at the opportune moment, and seek accountability. In 2017, in my view, the court really adopted a fairly liberal test, on quite a number of issues. But, first, the framing of an election as a process meant that you're not just looking at the day. You must cast your net pretty wide. begin to investigate on a number of environmental issues, all of which go towards creating an environment of, for a free and fair election. But secondly, just really focusing its determination around the unverifiability of the results transmission process, which is one limb of the election, was very interesting. Again, it's a huge burden then on IEBC, and it's a huge burden that is very much linked to the integrity then of the electronic system that IEBC has put in place.
So the question is,
all these issues.
Yeah, what happens if we have pretty much the same sort of environment of an election, to quote your words, and we have all these problems as we run to the elections, as we had in 2017, and then we have pretty much, say, the same problems on result transmission or, the use of technology. Then what happens? What should the court decide?
Let me be the devil's advocate, huh?
I like that because I don't like the devil.
So in 2017, if you read the majority decision, the majority opinion of the Supreme Court judges, essentially they had a quarrel with two things, two violations. If you're saying that you must demonstrate that there were substantial violations of the principles of the Constitution and the law and the Elections Act. Essentially, in terms of a test, it means that what amounts to a substantial violation is what the court perceives it to be. It is, the court looking at it, weighing the scale and saying, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, in the scheme of things, we are persuaded. You see how subjective that is. And that can be problematic. And this is why. Because as Koreri is saying, an election is a process. And in the nature of things, there will be certain things that will go wrong with the election, no doubt. Any election...
They already are.
Yes, exactly. But on that basis, how then do you determine? Because then you have to disaggregate. You have to be able to say that we satisfy that, well, some things went right, but some things went wrong. And we think that the things that went wrong were much, much more important than the things that went right. So here is a challenge that I've had with the 2017 decision. Because we were told, if you look at it, if you look at the argumentation by both parties, they did not fault the tabulation and tallying of votes in 2017. They were saying that those were okay. Mm-hmm. We voted okay. We tabulated the outcomes okay, and we tallied okay. Problems, and this is where the violations were found, were with respect to the transmission and the verification of results. So the question then would be, and I think this is now where the challenge of the timelines come in. Would it have been possible, because if we had the materials, if we had time, we'd say, but we have the votes. Why don't we just go back to it?
But we just don't have the time. That's a...
But that is a problem that we have created as a country. Why can't we resolve that problem? But if in that scenario, do you then say that that the violations of the principles of the Constitution and the law was substantial, when some part was okay and the other part was not? Should that determination, one that a court makes, which is a lesser evil, because essentially what the court is doing is throwing the proverbial baby with the bathwater.
To be a devil's advocate, to borrow again from you.
Yes.
The whole point of us creating a Supreme Court is to deal with these problems that we have with elections and their historical problems, right? So we just didn't create it because it was a fun thing to do. It's just that we will be funny during elections, as we are. We will cut corners, and we expect that we will create an institution that then will guarantee us, we come to you, and then you'll say, I look at this whole thing based on those, the Constitution and all the Election Acts. Isn't that the whole point of the Supreme Court then?
It is, but the danger with the approach that the Supreme Court took is that it set a very stringent test. And it was using, there's a case that that they cited. This is a case of Kabage versus Nganga. And they're saying that, in that case, they were saying that any non-compliance, any, emphasis, any non-compliance with the law regulating the electoral process would affect, not that did or might or could, it would. Which means that we are going to be extremely stringent as the Supreme Court. We are not going to tolerate any kind of violation. Now, is that a realistic test is what I would ask.
And I think just going back to what Prof is talking about, you know, I like to look at it as well from just an institutional standpoint, because at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is also, it's an institution of governance. And so it must, I'm sure, reflect on the consequence of its decisions. And in 2017, our Supreme Court was lifted, you know, in the eyes of many people. It was really elevated and celebrated across the world for doing what hitherto appeared impossible. But the political consequence of what they did has led us, you know, has led to all sorts of perverse, you know, sort of developments in our politics. And so even as the Supreme Court contemplates the issues that will invariably come before it, I think one of the things that will weigh on its mind, I do hope, would be what would our decision actually mean? Would it be able to, is it going to lead to a deepening of our democracy, you know, a deepening of, you know, integrity in our elections? Is it going to, you know, ensure that as we look to the horizon, our country is going to be better off because of this? Or will it lead us down the slippery slope, you know, of greater fragmentation and greater conflict, you know, and economic and social uncertainty? And so I believe that even though that's an environmental issue, not necessarily a legal issue, but these institutions are situated within a context. And so I'm sure it's something that will be reflected upon.
We've had two Supreme Court decisions, 2013, 2017. 2013, you know, they were conservatives, did have the time, and there were political consequences, right? The 5 years that went on was sort of like, you know, a standoff period politically, right? 2017 then created
a different kind of standoff. Exactly,
a different kind of standoff. So really we're asking the Supreme Court to deal with the political problem that is not its problem in the beginning.
True, but that is precisely why the Supreme Court needs to have a better test.
Yeah.
So that its legitimacy survives. And that is why we need to rethink some of these tests, given that they are inherently subjective. And so hopefully, as the Supreme Court is reflecting on how to approach the petitions that will no doubt be filed before it, it thinks about these things. That how can we, because I mean the environment matters, the context matters. It's a political process. You don't want a court that people see as illegitimate, because outcomes can be, yes, they might be right, but are they seen to be? Do the people see them to be right, or is it that the people see that the court is actually deciding the outcome of an election? And so I would see in this scenario, for example, I would have wanted the Supreme Court to have said that, yes, we know that some parts of this process went right. However, we think that the part that went wrong, is it overplayed or subsumed the part that went the part that went wrong was much more than the part that went right. That way, at least the next court is guided to be able to say, and the people can say that, look, this is the process by which
these things are decided on.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you also discourage institutions such as the IEBC from doing certain things.
And I think just before we close on this, I think one of the things that I'm looking at in this particular election is the fact that the polling center is going to be a very important locus, you know, in this particular election, including in relation to the transmission of results. You know, and so if there's a place where irregularities would really arise, it's in the way in which the management of the polling center, you know, will be conducted. But you know, and the way in which parties then conduct themselves around, you know, around that day. So all the, you know, the logistical issues, you know, the technology working on that material day, you know, power being, you know, available when counting is actually taking place.
The phones working.
The phones working. All that stuff around the polling center. And then if there is network, if people are able, if the polling offices are able to transmit, you know, the results form, a picture of it or a scanned copy of it, you know, to the portal required, all that stuff at the polling center are going to really be amplified much more than previously. And then you need to layer what happened in 2017 with the reality of, you know, the ubiquity now of our use of the mobile telephony, real-time reporting. All these things will play into the psyche, you know, not only of citizens, but obviously of, you know, of the court when it finally gets to, you know, consider this matter.
30 seconds, final questions for you as we finish the program. What makes you not sleep at night as we head to the election? What are the legal questions that are making you awake?
I don't know whether it's the legal question, but it's really more to do with sobriety and a sense of responsibility and a sense of reckoning on the part of, you know, of the country, the fact that we do have a country to take care of beyond the 9th of August, and that I think it behooves everybody, especially those bestowed with the responsibility of running this election, to really, you know, do their very best to use this time to deliver an election that all of us will look at and say that perhaps we don't even need to go to the Supreme Court, even if the elections are going to be closed or the results will be closed.
30 seconds for you.
The IBC, if the IBC does its work, then and appreciates the need to keep the country together, then I think we'll have a very, very easy election. So hopefully my hope is that the IBC has learned major lessons from the decision of the Supreme Court in Raila Odinga 2017.
All right, Professor Miguel Akech, Dr. Korisingwe, thank you very much both for coming.
Thank you.
I appreciate the knowledge and the education. I do own now a degree in law, LLB, with all due respect. Have a good night.
Thank you.